Today's topic, that is the environment, climate change, and the system that we're in is really very timely in view of the recent series of environmental disasters and the apparently growing frequency of them, warming of the oceans and so forth. It's also a topic that socialist organizations really need to pay more attention to and, sort of break out of our traditional mold a little bit. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Heather Kangas. She's a member of the ISO. She's organized and worked for many environmental organizations and campaigns, including Avaaz, the Climate Action Factory, Earthworks, PowerShift, and Friends of the Earth.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just going to stand, and don't mind me, I'm just reading from my, fun electronic device. Do you want to sit?
I'll sit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the more doom and gloom kind of stuff, like, why capitalism and climate change are linked, and sort of looking at the current day picture of what we're facing. But don't worry, Nick will give us some hopeful insights, but just so you all don't get depressed when I'm talking. So again, I'm Heather and I'm with the Baltimore ISO. In his book, Ecology and Socialism, Chris Williams writes, "The rapacity of capitalism knows no bounds. Indeed, capitalism by its very nature is unbounded. As soon as a limit or boundary is reached, it must exceed it. Capitalism has reached a point in its development that now threatens the basic biogeochemical processes of the planet as human civilization has come to know them. Ecological devastation is not an accidental outcome of capitalist development, but as with class exploitation and war, an intrinsic element of the system." So our addiction to fossil fuels in countries like the United States exists because it is proven again and again to be hugely profitable for those who control it. So some figures. In 2011, the top 5 oil companies, being BP, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, Shell, and Chevron, reported $135 billion profit, and estimates of annual fossil fuel subsidies range from anywhere between $10 billion and $52 billion. And to give folks an idea of what that amount of money means, after Hurricane Sandy, there were some proposals that came out about building a flood barrier around New York City, and how much that would cost to prevent future flooding and sea level rise, because New York City is basically on sea level, and that is estimated to cost between $10 to $16 billion. So basically, if we got rid of some of the subsidies that the fossil fuel industry is getting, we could protect New York City from flooding in the future. The U.S. military, along with being responsible for war and devastation in many countries abroad, is the biggest purchaser of oil in the world and the biggest consumer of oil in the United States. It uses about 1 million barrels per day, and in 2011, the total cost of keeping troops cool by air conditioning the tents in Iraq and Afghanistan costed roughly $20 billion. I don't have the numbers for the presidential campaign this year, although we know it was the most expensive campaign in history, but during the 111th Congress, which occurred between 2009 and 2010, the fossil fuel industry spent $25 million on congressional campaigns. Meanwhile, just weeks after Hurricane Sandy, it was estimated by Climate Central, a climate think tank, that 2012 is predicted to set the record of the hottest year since 1895, when they actually started doing records of temperatures. Despite climate science and a historic drought this summer that contributed to wildfires in the West and Great Plains, there were no questions asked about climate change during the presidential debates, and neither candidate brought it up as a voting issue. During one of the debates, Romney and Obama actually had a back and forth arguing about which one of them was the bigger supporter of the coal industry. And they did. They were like, "No, I support Cold War." It was literally ridiculous. And actually, both of them had plans that were very similar sounding about expansion of domestic oil production via offshore drilling, pipelines, etc. In fact, it came out recently that Obama himself, in a private meeting in 2009 with major environmental groups such as the Sierra Club, a group I worked for, Friends of the Earth, and others, they had a meeting, and Obama emphasized that we're not to talk about climate change or global warming, but we're going to talk about the issue of needing clean energy and clean energy jobs. So basically putting the horse before the cart in that idea. Then just a week before the election, here we have on the East Coast being hit by Hurricane Sandy, whose wind and rain and storm surges left 8.5 million people without power across 21 states, some of whom waited almost 15 days for their power to be restored, so they were without heat, hot water. Many of the people most impacted by the storm were communities where working class people live, people of color, seniors, families. In New York City, approximately 80,000 public housing residents who are housed via the New York City Housing Authority lost power, heat, and hot water, which wasn't restored for some until 2 weeks after the storm. And it was clear in the days following Sandy that many of the states were really not prepared for the impact of this storm. It was almost reminiscent of Hurricane Katrina, where if you all remember, like, the visual of people on top of their house saying, "Help, the water is rising," it almost brought back those memories because people were trapped in these really tall buildings, really in need of resources. And, you know, obviously official government relief from FEMA and the Red Cross was almost non-existent in some communities, leaving grassroots efforts from groups like Occupy Sandy, which is basically some of the same folks who organized Occupy Wall Street, to take a lead on distributing food and medical supplies and identifying people who were stuck in their homes. So basically you had, you know, people like ourselves out there doing the job that the government is really supposed to be doing without probably like half the supplies. You know, I mean, we don't have helicopters or wet vacs and hazmat suits like FEMA does. And while the grassroots efforts from Hurricane Sandy have been inspiring and show the power of collective organization, it is jarring that the government has not taken responsibility in these relief efforts and has no plans in place for future disasters caused by climate change. You know, because the same thing happened with Hurricane Katrina, and it kind of seems like we're still not as prepared this time. This is especially urgent considering an increased expectation for more intense storms and climate events following warmer temperatures and sea level rise. Coastal cities like New York City, where millions of people live, are particularly vulnerable to flooding, and it is actually estimated by the Environmental Justice Foundation that global warming will force up to 150 million climate refugees to move to other countries in the next 40 years due to drought, sea level rise, lack of access to food and water, among other things. And many scientists have agreed for some time now that in order to actually curb some of these effects and impacts from climate change, that the United States and many countries in the world should reduce their carbon emissions 80% by 2050, which we're a long way from doing. And I think that's because some of the solutions to this problem are actually try to filter back into the capitalist system, which created the problem in the first place. Some solutions to climate change offered in the wake of intensified natural disasters like Sandy are minimal and often removed from the larger problem that we face. There has been a trend within mainstream environmental groups, as well as among the ruling class, to promote individual responsibility and lifestyle changes as a solution to global climate change. Several products being advertised are promoting green consumption while emphasizing the acts of individuals as key to stopping global warming. So it's like drive a Prius kind of thing. And actually, when I was doing research for this talk about climate refugees and the idea that there's going to be migrations of people from small island nations or people who no longer have food security in their communities, a group was talking about this big issue, because it's a big issue, like the migration of millions of people. And they had a link on their website, and they said, like, things you can do, solutions, here are some solutions. And they were drive smart, buy local products, replace your light bulbs with compact fluorescent bulbs, buy energy efficient appliances, plant a tree, reduce, reuse, recycle. And while I don't think that these are bad things to do at all, I think that this is no way a solution to our larger systemic problem. Because as you all remember, like, the largest emitter we have is the US military. So it's not like all of us are responsible for the massive amounts of pollution. Another solution being offered by the ruling class is carbon trading, also known as cap and trade, which has been popular among the dominating countries that pass climate negotiations, mostly because it's good for profits and still allows industries to pollute. Carbon trading allows for free permits for big polluters, fake offsets, and distraction from what's really required to tackle the climate crisis. Advocating this risky market fix for a problem that's actually caused by the market makes no sense. It makes no sense at all because companies can still pollute. Another popular solution offered to decrease the world's population is to decrease the world's population. This is kind of like the Malthus theory. This is a popular theory among the groups and individuals who attribute social and environmental problems to human numbers and the amount of people that live in the world. A prominent liberal writer, Chris Hedges, wrote, "All efforts to staunch the effects of climate change are not going to work if we do not practice vigorous population control." So he's like someone who's beloved by a lot of liberals, and that's what he said. The argument that we have too many people directs the attention and efforts of sincere activists to programs that will not have any substantial effect on the environment, but may also be very harmful for human rights, especially women's rights, because it kind of goes back to the eugenics argument. We can discuss that more in the discussion. And as Barry Commoner put it, who's a famous environmentalist, he said, "Pollution begins not in the family bedroom, but in the corporate boardroom." And I think that that's important to remember as we discuss like how we can actually solve this crisis. The capitalist system and the power of the 1% are the root causes of today's ecological crisis, and we cannot look to that system for solutions. So Nick will give us what some of the possible solutions are.
Thank you.